in the middle of May. This could be the last year. We've been doing Sprouts programs for 22 years, I think. We're hoping to find a new director this year, but we will have at least one final season. We also finally had some questions about making donations because we're not in person this year. If you would like to do that, we have set up a Venmo account. If you're on Venmo, you can go to Venmo and search for Tony Appelhans, APPELHANS, at IFCGA. We're new to this, so hopefully that will work too. And thank you in advance. Finally, a little bit of housekeeping before we start with our presentation. We're going to keep everybody muted and with your video off. We are recording this, so it will be available again sometime on the website. You can submit questions as the class proceeds. They will go to Tony, and at the end of each section of this presentation, it will work differently each time. I'll stop and we'll answer any questions pertinent to the particular month that we've just completed. Our goal here is to teach and promote sustainable organic gardening, and we really encourage you to ask any questions that will help clarify that. We have a whole slate of classes that we will talk about as we go through this presentation. And if you want to see the whole calendar, you can go to the ifcga.org website and you can see this year's offerings posted up there. Okay, I think that takes care of our housekeeping business, so let's just go ahead and get started. I'm going to start sharing the screen. If for some reason you're not seeing the presentation, send Tony a note and we'll try to help you sort it out. All right, here we go. Okay, Growing Strong is our month-by-month garden calendar, particularly for southeastern Idaho. A note to consider if you don't happen to be from southeastern Idaho, since we don't know where all our visitors or participants are from, you can adjust this calendar a week or two in either direction, of course, depending on whether you're in a warmer climate, for instance, the western part of the state, or a colder one up by Rexburg, Ashton, St. Anthony. So keep that in mind as we're going through, depending on where you're from. So a few caveats before we start. These are always good to keep in mind. In Idaho, it's true a lot of places, keep in mind that what might have happened in March last year might not be true until May this year, or the other way around. So what you've seen in one spring or fall or summer is not necessarily going to be the same the next year. So just be prepared to be flexible. Always determine the soil moisture levels before working your soil. We have on the website easy soil moisture test guidelines, real straightforward test. Just pick up some soil in your hand. It's described on the website, and later on in the presentation, I'll be going out to the website and showing you where to find all this. There are almost as many opinions about garden issues as there are gardeners, so keep in mind that you'll be hearing lots of different opinions from different people. You need to figure out what works in your conditions. So keep working at it. If what somebody tells you doesn't work, tweak it and try it again. In the calendar, you'll see references to start plants. That means we're starting seeds indoors in containers and planting out when the conditions are more suitable. Direct sow means they're going right into the ground. And an old gardener is saying, if you're not failing some of the time, you're not trying enough new things. And finally, you're going to be working with organic gardening, and a foundational principle there is that you need to embrace imperfection. things do not have to be perfect to be good. And so don't expect everything to be perfect, because that's not going to happen. Okay, so here are the categories. Here are the categories that we'll go through for each month: planning, maintenance, seed starting, planting, soil building, propagation, harvest, and food storage, just for fun. Now you may, especially as a beginning gardener, you may not be ready for all of these. You may not want to do seed starting in the beginning. You may not want to do propagation. So don't feel like you have to do everything in every one of these, but they're here for you when you're ready for them. As noted on the bottom here, this whole thing will be up on the website. There is currently one power or a PDF version of this. This new one has been updated, so we'll replace the old one with this new one sometime after today. Okay, so now we're into January. Remember that we're going to go through all those categories for January, and we'll stop at the end of January to see if there are any questions about what we've talked about to that point. One of the most fun things you can do in January is, of course, get some garden catalogs or get online and start looking and getting excited about all the great stuff that's out there. So many seeds, such a bounty of seeds out in the world, and most of them will grow here in Idaho. So this is one of my favorites, Fedco. Johnny selected seeds. We'll talk about that and where you can find our list later on. Get out your garden notebooks. I've been keeping garden notebooks, and I'm not naturally an organized person, so don't feel like you have to be. This one started in 1993, and this is my one from last year. So this has invaluable information in it. It tells me all about what I learned last year, what I loved, what I didn't like, etc. So get a notebook, get it ready. If you've got one already, look at your notes from last year and start making a seed and plant list. Evaluate last year's garden, and if you had particular problems or things you were particularly interested in, this is a great time to start getting online and doing some research to address those interests or concerns. If you've got seeds, take an inventory of them. Think about how they've been kept, how carefully you stored them. If you need to, and we'll get into this later in the calendar, you can do some germ tests, and we have instructions for that as well. Order your seeds. Anybody who tried to get seeds last year after the end of February, beginning of March was in pretty tough shape. So do your seed inventory, decide what you want to grow, and then get your orders in, because I suspect it's going to be another big year for the seed folks. A lot of places ran out last year. Inventory your seed starting supplies if you're going to do seed starting. Make a garden plan. So decide where you're going to put things, how much you need for each of each crop, depending on how many people you're feeding, how much you love whatever it is you're planting. And then set up a garden calendar to identify planting times. This is something that even experienced gardeners appreciate, because it reminds you throughout the spring, oh yeah, it's time to plant X. And those things can get lost in the shuffle without a garden plan. A really helpful source for that is Johnny Selected Seeds. They have an interactive calendar in which you can go into the calendar, set a date for when your approximate last spring frost is. And I've used the 20th of May, although it's frosted well into June some years. And then you get this great chart that says, okay, if you want to do artichokes, you should start them 8 weeks early. Plant them out from the 20th of May on, and that's just really helpful information. So don't hesitate to get out there. There's no cost to use it. It's just a service they provide. And it's in their growers library. So make use of that. Also, as you're planning your garden, you're making a garden plan, think about how you're going to use your space. One of the things that has given way in my garden many years ago was this idea that I needed to have single rows of everything. If you look at these two, you'll see the difference in planting space that I get from doing wide rows instead of single rows. I'm getting more area to plant good stuff in than if I went with single rows. You also have a lot less pathway to deal with if you widen your garden beds. Also consider how you're going to water your garden. We're in a high desert. It's important to think about that, both in terms of our water use, but also in terms of the health of your soil and your plants. And just FYI, we've got Water-Wise Gardening coming up on February 13th. So get that on your calendar. That'll be a good class, especially if you're a beginner and wondering what your options are and what the best way to proceed is. Okay, maintenance. Not too much in the garden at this point. It's more things about your whole environment in your yard. Watch trees for damaging snow loads. If you have icy places, instead of using a salt-based product, use sand or sawdust-based. That doesn't impact your soil in a negative way as salt can, and it works just as well. If you're a really orderly sort, this is a good time to get your tools out, sharpen them, get them oiled so they'll all be ready to go when you need them. If you're not, you're like me then. Seed starting. If you're going to do seed starting, you want to be cleaning and disinfecting your pots at this point. These are good instructions for that. Be sure that you have a good quality potting soil. Don't buy the cheap stuff at the discount stores because it will not serve you well, and it won't serve your plants well. You want vigorous, rapidly growing plants who are ready to get going when you get them in the ground. So be sure you get some good quality potting soil. Often you can do that at our garden centers. They make their own versions, and those are pretty reliable. Do a germ test. If you have seeds that are old, which can vary from 2 years if it's things like lettuce and parsnips to 10 years if it's tomatoes, but do a germ test on them, a germination test. Again, we have a spot on our website under class notes and presentations, and there are all kinds of links there, including an easy germ test to do. You're going to need supplemental light, so get your plant stand up or your lights connected, whatever you're going to use. And if you're going to start in February, you'll need to be protecting them if they're out in an unheated garage. We also have instructions for a plant stand up on the website in the same location as you see above in the class notes and presentations. Soil building. This is probably the single most important thing that you need to think about for your garden. Healthy soil, healthy plants, healthy food. We've got 2 soil classes coming up on our next one, January 30th, and then the following one is the 6th of February. And you will learn the basics of healthy soil, how to build it, how to maintain it, and it will be from local people. So you can get a lot of good local insight. We also have a really good link at our website called Building Healthy Soil. And there are a lot of entertaining, concise videos on there. There are also some more in-depth ones if you want to get more in-depth. Really helps you understand what's going on in the soil, what it is that you're encouraging as you build your soil. I think I'll stop here for a moment and just go out to the website and show you how to find these locations. Let's see, where is this? Here we go. Okay, so here's our main page at the Community Garden website. Down here, you'll click on the main menu. The free organic gardening class schedule is right here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Let me find something a little more. Okay, here's our organic gardening class schedule. Here's the class notes and presentations. And this is the one that you want to click. Garden calendar, and then down below here are all the presentations. So this is where you'll find the germination test, the propagation plant stands, soil moisture test. That's all listed in here. It's a very unsophisticated website, but it's full of good information. So you'll find your way through there and get a lot of good links. We also have, this is the link right here to the Building Healthy Soil videos. And we've pulled those out into their own spot so that you can look at Dr. Klut's soil ones, very short, concise, but informative videos, more extensive ones from Dr. Ingham, and then there are others down there as well. So that's how you get to those links in on our website. Okay, we'll go back to our presentation. Okay. Yeah, here we are. Okay. Propagation. If you want to save seeds from some of your plants this season, start thinking about what plants, and you'll want to do the simplest ones first if you're new to this, like lettuce and tomatoes. Do a little research in January. These are good times for sitting and reading or researching online. Seed Savers Exchange is a really good resource for this, and there's an address there. And then on March 6th, Casey O'Leary, who's the founder of the Snake River Seed Co-op, is coming to, she's not coming here, she did that last year, but this year she's going to be joining us online to talk about seed saving. And just her enthusiasm alone will make you want to try it. So get that on your calendar too. If you've got veggies stored, check on them. By now, garlic could be starting to sprout. If it is, you can dry it and make garlic powder out of it. If you've got carrots and parsnips and leeks under straw cover in your garden, it's a good time to check on them, get some more of them out. You'll be lucky if you haven't had the voles harvest them for you, but most years we get a nice harvest from out there. And then lastly, some fun things to do in January that really just are fun. You can get ginger from the grocery store, and if you get a nice fresh bit of ginger, it will actually bud and produce a ginger plant. They're kind of hard to keep going in Idaho because we're so dry, but I'm sure some of you can figure out how to do that. If you are going to put out some super early tomatoes, and they could be started at the end of this month, you have to plan on really serious protection, like walls of water or something, if you want to put them out. You don't want to let them get too big, so that if you're starting them now, excuse me, or by the end of this month, they should go out sometime in April, and you will need something like a wall of water to protect them. If you have a good light source, a plant stand or a grow light somewhere, good time to start basil and cilantro and dill just for early harvest, not for putting out, but for enjoying through the remainder of the winter and early spring. Okay, so we're going to break right here. And let me just check with Tony to see if we have any questions that need to be addressed.
We had one question come in, and that question is, can an arrow garden be used to start seeds?
Sorry, what kind of a garden?
Arrow, A-E-R-O.
Well, I don't know what that is, so I can't answer that question. Sorry. Anything
That was
else?
our only question.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on to February. If I can figure out how to unpause this, there we go. Okay. Now we're starting to get into more serious planning. Complete your seed orders. Again, last year, lots and lots of places ran out of seeds, including potatoes. So get those in February for sure, if you didn't do it in January. Check out your January calendar that we just went through to see if there was anything you missed. Another reference, and we keep pushing you back towards soil questions because that is so fundamental to having a healthy organic garden. Videos on our Healthy Soil at our Healthy Soil link are really good for understanding what it is you're trying to accomplish in building your soil. Again, those next two classes will be about healthy soil. So if you can participate in those, you will learn a lot. If you're going to buy soil amendments, this is a good time to order them because then they're on hand when you get to March. Planning, again, we have some regular pests that are problems in all gardens. There are organic solutions for all of them. And so it's a good time if you're already gardening and you know which things bother you, which ones are problems in your garden. You can start doing some research on those now so that you're prepared when the season gets into full swing. We're also going to have a specific class on organic insect and disease control. That'll be on February 20th. Another thing that you can be planning for in February before you can actually get out there is plan for how you're going to get more pollinators in your garden. They're vital to a healthy garden, and there are specific strategies that you can employ that will help you encourage those. Again, we have a class specifically about this coming up on the 27th of February called Pollinators in Your Garden, and Dr. Steve Love is going to present that. So it will be an excellent class for sure. Maintenance. Good time to prune your trees. If you've got fruit trees growing or other kinds of trees that need pruning, with the exceptions of maple and birch, which you don't want to prune this time of year, it's a good time to do it in February before the sap is flowing. If you've got beds in, for instance, a cold frame or up against your house, if you have a little greenhouse, something like that, it's a good time to get those beds prepped because you can plant in those by the end of the month. If you've got geraniums and those kind of plants that you've wintered over, February is a good time to cut those back. Then they can, as the light increases, they'll start putting out new growth and they'll be the healthier for the rest of the season if you do that now. Otherwise, they get quite scrawny. Oops. This is in my way. I can't see. Seed starting. So you went to Johnny's, you made out, you filled out that calendar. You've got a garden calendar that shows you what needs to be planted when. So use that as a reference. It will be really helpful if you're starting your own seeds. It's a good time to start things like onions, leeks, shallots. They take a lot of time to get sized up so they can go in your garden. The advantage of starting your own in those and in other plant families is that you have an enormous variety of seeds that are available to start from seed compared to the 2 or 3 varieties you might see in a greenhouse. So if you want to expand your horizons in terms of what plants you're growing, what they look like, how big they get, etc., this is a good way to do it. Other plants that require particularly long growing periods, like lobelia and petunias and snapdragons, you would want to start those by the end of the month. If you have a cold frame or a greenhouse or those beds that are up near the edge of your house, you can do some direct sowing of cold tolerant greens like lettuce, kale, those kinds of things. You may still need to cover them. You probably will, because this is Idaho, but you can get them started, and it can give you a really vigorous harvest of fresh greens by the beginning of April. So it's a fun thing to do. Back to the soil building. If you still haven't watched those videos that we talked about, get back out there and watch those, and see what you can learn about building your soil. You're not going to be actively doing that now, but all the knowledge that you gain at this point will serve you really well when you get out there and can actually get your hands in the soil. Propagation. If you forced bulbs in November, and that will make sense to you when we get to November, it's time to bring those out, water them, and put them in a bright room, and then you can have tulips and daffodils and all kinds of lovely things blooming in your house in March instead of outside in May. Those geranium cuttings that you trimmed off your geranium plants, drop the ends of them into some water and get them rooted, and then you can plant them and propagate a new plant from those. If you are using walls of water, and we'll have pictures of those for those of you who don't know what those are, you can start more tomatoes at the end of the month or putting out in the middle of April with that kind of really serious protection on them. The beauty of that is you can have fresh tomatoes in June. If you can grow a vigorous plant, get it out and protect it in the middle of April, you'll have nice tomatoes coming on in June instead of late July. Oops. Oh, sorry. I've lost my place. There we go. So artichokes grow in Idaho, and they actually do quite well. If you want to try that, start them in February, because they need to get up to about a 6 to 8 inch size, and then they need to spend at least a month out in cold weather, which will promote their budding later in the spring. So you want them out there in the cold, but you need to protect them. They are not particularly frost tolerant, so walls of water are another good solution if you want to try growing artichokes. If you don't like to eat them, grow them for the gorgeous blossoms that they produce. They're really spectacular. Also, if you want to try celery or celeriac, this is a good time to start them. They're kind of slow starters, but they do really well once you get them out into the garden. So it's a fun thing to try. Okay, we're at the end of February. Tony, do we have any new questions?
We do have some questions. First one is, what is the name of the seed company you like?
Oh, okay. It's called, well, there are a number of them. I like Fedco seeds, F-E-D-C-O. Johnny's Selected Seeds has great northern-based seeds. Renee's Garden has a lot of interesting and fun varieties to try. If you go to our website, there will be a link for seed sources, and we have noted the ones that we like the best. So Seed Savers Exchange has a lot of great seeds. Go to that website and you'll find our seed source list there.
Next question was where to buy the potting soil you mentioned.
Well, I don't mention a specific potting soil, but you can get good potting soil from Sunnyside Gardens. You can get good potting soil from Town and Country. The one that I prefer, if I can get it, and last year I got it from Sunnyside, is called Sunshine Starting Mix. But there are other ones that would work well too. Just don't buy the really cheap ones because they're really cheap and they don't do a very good job for your plants.
Okay, this has to do with seed starting, and this person has been struggling with spindly, weak seedlings. How do you avoid this?
Good question. You avoid it by giving them more light. Almost always, if you've got good potting soil, now that could be another source of problems for spindly, weak seedlings. But if you're using good potting soil and they're still spindly, you don't have enough light. And you need to get a light source, good strong light within a couple inches of your plants, moving it up as the plants grow. If you do that, you can get plants that look better than what you can buy in the nursery. It is really important to have good soil, good light, not too much water. That will cause problems. Again, on the class presentations and notes, there is I think it's a PowerPoint for seed starting that will talk about a lot of those issues.
Okay, one of our listeners wrote in that aero gardening is a small hydroponic system, but notes that it's very difficult to transfer plants from a hydroponic system to soil. So that's just some information from one of our listeners.
Yeah, that's helpful. I have no experience with hydroponics. I like the soil.
All right, one person wanted to know, when should you prune maple trees?
I think, I'm not sure about that because we don't prune our maple trees. If you're wanting to use your maple trees for syrup, you do that process sometime in February once the sap starts running. But when you actually prune maple trees, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm sure you can find that online.
Okay, and here's a question for a beginning gardener. What are 4 seeds/plants you would recommend to start a small garden with?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think the foundation of that decision is going to be what you like to eat. If you like to eat everything, I would if I could only plant 4 things and I wanted to keep it simple, I would do tomatoes just because I don't want to live without those. I would do green beans because they're prolific, they're easy to grow, they're delicious. I would maybe try one of the root crops, carrots. A little hard to get those germinated, but once they're germinated, they grow like crazy and require very little care. They also can tolerate soil that isn't that great if you're in the process of building your soil. And probably a lettuce or one of the greens or one of the greens combinations where you get lettuce and a bunch of other little greens in there. Those would be the ones I think I'd go with if I was really just starting out and wanted to get into the appreciation of all that good food without too much pain and anguish.
Okay, we had a note from a listener saying late summer to fall is the time to prune maple trees.
Oh, good.
And then
I was thinking that's when it was,
but place to buy apple and fruit trees that will grow here in Idaho.
Well, our local nurseries have lots of varieties, and most of them, I know at least Town and Country and Sunnyside guarantee them for the first season if you plant them properly. So that's a good start. There are also a number of online nurseries where you can get a broader selection of trees, fruit trees, and all kinds of trees and shrubs and berries and that kind of thing. But I would say if if you want to be assured that you're going to get something that works in Idaho, I would go to one of our local nurseries.
Okay, that looks like it. We did have one question, which was how large are the garden plots? I'm not sure what that's referring to.
Probably at the community gardens, and I'll just say briefly that they vary from probably the smallest ones are about 10 by 10 and the largest ones are 20 by 20, and it just depends on what's available in a given year.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, so we will go back, and now we're getting into March and things are going to get more serious here because now you can get in the soil. Maintenance and weed control is really central to having both a healthy garden and being able to enjoy your garden. And that takes some pretty hardcore labor at the front end, but if you will be persistent in that, you can have a garden where you might spend a half an hour a week taking care of weeds. But that's premised upon a really thorough job that is outlined here, removing quackgrass and your other weeds by digging and extracting all the roots of perennial weeds. Quackgrass is the most common one. Bindweed is around here. If you start getting those up as soon as you see them in the spring and the soil is okay to work, you can really push them back and eventually eliminate them. If you're going to be doing drip irrigation, which we have used in our garden for about 30 years now, and we really love it, as soon as the soil is dry enough, you can get that system laid out. That presumes that you did your garden plan back in January or February, so you know where you're going to put things. You can divide perennials now, iris and those kinds of plants, divide them, move them around. Earlier is better for the most part. Just watch your soil moisture, and I refer you back again to that easy soil moisture test. It's on the website. It tells you how to assess that so you know whether the soil is going to end up being compacted if you start working on it. If you've got your garden beds mulched, which is a good thing in the winter because it provides protection for the soil and food for the microbes and the worms, start removing that. But don't actually work the soil until it's had a chance to dry out a bit. Remove dead stalks, etc., from last year's perennials. I leave those on through the winter so that they can catch snow and add to the insulation of the plant and the soil. But then I remove them in the early spring. Once the soil dries out, break out the biofork or a broad fork or even a gardening fork and start working, loosening the soil. We're not turning soil over anymore. I haven't turned a bit of soil over in my garden for 10 years or more. But start loosening the soil, put your compost on the top, and as you dig your fork in and wiggle it back and forth, that'll let that compost sift down in. The fork will loosen the soil without flipping the layers because that disrupts your microbial community in there. So you want to loosen the soil because your plants need that, but you don't want to be digging it and turning it over. If you have buds that are, if you've got apple trees, this is a good time to apply a soy-based dormant oil to suppress the apple maggots that can get in them. For the rest of us, now that the snow's gone, you can find all those tools you forgot out in the garden and get them back into condition for this new season. A little note on the issue of breaking up your soil. If you are in a new garden space, you may need a more vigorous method like a tiller, but don't fill in quackgrass or bindweed. because if you haven't removed it and you just run a tiller through it, what you're doing is you're replanting little sections of, particularly with the quackgrass, there's a node on there about every inch or two. And when you chop it up with a tiller, you break those roots up. They're all still in the soil, and every one of those nodes will sprout a new bit of grass. So clear it out first. If you don't have to use a tiller, all the better for your soil. If you do have to use it for the absolute least amount of time, both in individual applications and seasons, that you possibly can. Seed starting. So you are going to get serious about seed starting now if you're choosing to do seed starting. You've got that calendar that you made in January. So check it out to see what's on your list that needs to be planted. In March, I will be starting brassica family, all the cauliflower, cabbage, kale, broccoli, all of that. And later in the month is a good time to start most of your tomatoes. If you're not going to put them out with protection, you don't want them to be 10 weeks old by the time you can get them outside. You want them to still be in a very vigorous growing situation, not compacted in a little tiny root with their roots really compacted in a little tiny pot. So planting them later in March gives you April and into May to get a good sturdy little plant going and plant it and transplant it out when it's still in a very vigorous growing mode. Soil building. If you're going to do a soil test, this is a good time to send one off. Then you can get your information back. A lot of soil tests will only give you some pretty basic NPK information. It won't tell you probably anything about the biology in your soil, which is the single most important component, but it might give you some basic information that will help you understand, especially a garden in a new place. Soil amendments, you can add those now once the soil is workable. If it's not, then wait until April. Again, this is a time where if you've got compost that you held over from last year, you can get it on your beds. If you've got a compost pile and it's finally thawed out, it's a good time to get it turning and active again. It's also a good time to start a new pile. Don't put your materials from over the winter on your old pile because then it'll complicate using it, but you can start a new pile with the leftovers from your winter garden. Planting, you've got your planting calendar so you can see what plants need to be started now and which ones you can direct sow. It's a good time to divide and transplant rhubarb if you're a rhubarb fan. The things that you can direct sow now would be peas, greens, radishes in protected beds or in a cold frame. You can put them out in the garden too. Just be prepared to have to cover them. They are hardy, but they're not hardy against some of the temperatures that we can get at the end of March even. So any of this direct sowing, I would hold off doing that until the end of the month. If you started your artichokes back in February, they may be of a size that you can now put them out in walls of water by the end of the month. If it's going to get really cold, you can put an additional cover over the wall of water, a cardboard box or a quilt or something like that. But if you get them out by late March, early April, then they will get the cold treatment they need in order to properly bud for you in a month or two after that. By now, if you've got stuff wintering over in your garden, it's time to get them out. They're going to start growing if you don't harvest them. So if you've got carrots, parsnips, or leeks, finish harvesting those If you have the bounty that we sometimes are faced with, you can share them with your neighbors and your friends. They're always glad to have them. They're so delicious and sweet that time of year. If you want to collect seeds from parsnips, just leave 1 or 2 in the ground and you will have a bumper crop of parsnip seeds for the next year. It's handy to do that because parsnips don't keep very well, the seeds. So if you can renew your seed collection every year or 2, you'll have much better results when you start saving your own. If you're storing squash, keep an eye on them. They're going to start getting squishy in here. So if you feel like they're getting to the end of their life, it's a good time to process them. Get them in the freezer, eat them. There are a lot of good recipes. Storage onions and shallots, and this presumes that you have chosen varieties that are good for storage. There are some that are amazing. They should still be good, but watch them for an occasional sprout coming up out of the onion, in which case you want to use that one. If you find ones that have gotten soft, you want to put those in the compost. But I've had storage onions that I've used 1.5 years after they were harvested and they were still fine. So pay attention to your varieties and you can get some really nice storage out of that. This is a good time to try forcing flowering shrubs for fun, like forsythia, pussy willow, apple. The thing to do with these is protect them from being in too dry an environment and too much warmth to begin with. So you might start them in your garage in a jar with some water. And as they start to open up, then you can bring them in and enjoy the blossom. If you bring them in too soon, they get too warm and they don't bud and flower as nicely. Okay, so we're at the end of a new month. Tony, do we have any questions?
We do have a few questions.
Okay.
First one is, what is the importance of removing mulch in March?
It just lets the soil begin to warm up. Mulch is a really good tool for protecting the soil through the winter, providing nutrients to your microbes, but it also keeps the soil cool. So if you've got a bed that you want to plant in, you need to start pulling the mulch off so the soil can begin to warm.
Okay, what mulch do you suggest?
I use a lot of different materials. We are out in the country a ways, and so we can use straw, we can use leaves from our trees. I've used, in some occasions, I've used some really coarse bark just to experiment with that as a mulch. Grass clippings, if they are not treated with any kind of poison, are good. They provide a lot of nutrients. That's
Okay.
probably the main ones.
Do you have a product name for soy-based oil? And the other question was, can you recommend a non-soy-based oil?
I don't have a product name. You can find them online. And there are petroleum-based ones. I don't know if there are products that use some oil besides a soy-based one. It's going on the plant. It's not anything that you're going to consume.
Okay, here's someone who's brand new to their space and they have noxious weeds, white brioni, etc. They'd like to know what the best way to have these noxious weeds taken care of and when to take care of them and who should do this.
Well, it depends on if you have a gardener, I guess. You need to take care of them as soon as you can. As soon as the soil is clear of snow and it's dried out enough, you're not going to be compacting it if you're on it. And you can, again, look at our soil test, our soil moisture test. You need to dig them out. Bryonia has a big parsnip-like root. You need to extract that entire root in order to keep the plant from coming back. Quackgrass, all the roots need to be removed. Bindweed, you remove as much of it as you can, but the roots go down sometimes 20 feet, so you can't get them all. You just have to keep whacking those off at the surface once you've done your initial cleanup. And as soon as you can do it without damaging your soil. And keep it up through the summer into the fall, especially the first year you're trying to clear it. That will really help you get ahead of it.
Okay, can you start new pussy willows and forsythia from cuttings?
Probably you can. I've never tried it, but they root when you have the cuttings and you're forcing the bulbs, they will put roots out. And if you wait to the appropriate time in the year, whenever that would be, you could probably just stick them out and get them growing. Keep them adequately watered in those first few months.
Where do you put the mulch after you remove it?
Well, I put it in my pathways, or I save it to move onto my potatoes when I plant those. You could put it in your compost pile. You could start a compost pile with your old mulch. Those would be the main things.
Okay. How would you adjust timing for seed starting and transplanting based on the last 2 years?
That assumes I remember the last 2 years. We've had some late frosts, as I recall. And my strategy is just to plant when I think it's the best time. And if it turns out that I'm wrong, I am prepared to cover. If you don't want to mess with covering, then you should just move your planting later into the year. If you normally plant at the end of May, you might not want to plant until the first or second week of June if you're really determined not to cover anything. What you may find out, though, is that this year we don't have a frost from May 12th on. And so you will have wasted an entire month of time. So I tend to take my chances with earlier planting, and I'm prepared to cover if I need to.
Okay, I'm brand new to gardening. Where is a good place to plant a garden? I have a west-facing house with a big backyard.
Any place that gets full sun. If you can have ideally 10 to 12 hours, the books say 8 hours is sufficient, but the more sunshine you can have on your garden throughout the course of a day, the better.
Okay, that's it for March.
Okay, where are we? I can't see the clock. Okay. All right, we're going to just keep going here. This is a true picture of April. One April when we got 14 inches of snow, but this is really what it should look like. So this will reference back to the person's question about when to start, what to do about weeds. Keep ahead of them. Keep removing the perennials by digging. Annuals, you can just cut them off if they haven't formed seeds yet. If they have formed seeds, you want to pull them, or if they've gotten too big to cut off, pull them out. If they're just greens, they can go into your compost, the annuals, not your perennials. If they're making seeds, throw them away. Start sheet mulching your pathways. That will reduce a lot of maintenance in your garden, and we'll talk about that in a minute. If you've got roses and other flowering plants that you protected with mulch over the summer, remove that mulch. Just pull it back from the plant. You can leave it on the ground and it'll continue to break down. Remove the old canes from your raspberries. Again, we leave those in to catch the snow through the winter, but we want them out of the way once the season is in full swing. Install support for peas that are not self-supporting. Most of the edible pod peas will require additional support, and there are some English peas that also need that. Get out your cobra head, and we'll be talking, you'll see a picture of this. This is my single favorite garden tool. If I had to give up everything else, I might keep a garden fork and then this. I really like this. And literally I get it out probably in March and I put it away in November. So if you don't have one, I really recommend getting one. It's an incredibly useful tool. If you're using drip, this will be the time to turn on your drip system, check for problems, be sure it's ready to go so that once you get your seeds or your plants in, you're not having to jerk them around to fix problems. Here's an explanation of sheet mulching. And I'm not going to go through this in excruciating detail, but you will get the gist of it in looking at this. The most important thing to know about this is you do need to do some weed cleaning first. You can't just lay this sheet mulch over, a mass of ugly weeds and hope that it's going to take care of them. But if you will clean it out first and then do this sheet mulching process, you will have really good control for at least one season. And now that our weeds are largely under control, we can go 2 to 3 years without sheet mulching because we're getting the benefits of that. We'll use other kinds of mulch, but we won't necessarily do the newspaper or cardboard. Be sure you adequately overlap your layers, because if you just leave them like this, all kinds of things will come up in that interface. So overlap them, newspaper 6 or 7 inches, cardboard 3 or 4 or 5 inches. And this is a very effective way of both suppressing weeds, conserving moisture, but also building your soil, because those materials that you're using are going to decompose and they're going to feed your soil microorganisms. Check your garden calendar. This is a good time to start peppers and eggplants. You can start tomatoes as late as the middle of April and they'll be fine. If you want to try okra, you can successfully grow okra in Idaho. Start it late in April or the beginning of May. You don't want to put it out until you're pretty sure there aren't going to be any more frosts, and you don't want it to get too large before you get it out. So all it really needs is 2 to 3 weeks before it's going to go out. If you're protecting it, that gives you a little bit wider window for when to put it in the garden. Soil building, putting your compost or compost extract in beds as the seeds and starts are planted is a really good way to build that soil in the immediate area where your plants are going in. Keep building, keep your compost pile going all summer. You're going to balance the greens and browns as much as you can. The website has more information on composting, and there are great links online as well. Don't walk on your soil that you're going to plant in. Some beds in our gardens have not been walked on for 20 years because we know that that's where we're going to plant, and we want that soil as healthy and uncompacted as possible. If you've got a cover crop, it's a good time to get it cut down and gently turn it in or move it into your compost pile. If you're trying to break it down on the bed, then you want to keep it moist. One of the problems with getting cover crops properly decomposed in Idaho is that they don't get enough moisture to completely break down before you're ready to plant. So you have to provide that supplemental moisture. If you were in the East, you wouldn't need to do that, but this is Idaho. Planting, see what seeds, use your planting calendar to see what seeds need to be sown now. This is the time for direct sowing a lot of different plants, mostly cool weather ones. You can start putting your brassicas, that's your cabbage and cauliflower and all that, out later in the month. I don't use a row cover anymore, but I do monitor for cabbage butterflies because sometimes we'll see those as early as late April. I use BT, which is available widely in garden centers and online. It's a bacillus that targets specifically the larva of cabbage butterflies. So it's a really good organic process. If the temperatures are forecast to be lower than 32, it's good to cover these. They're hardy, but if they get too cold, you can trigger a response that causes them to bolt. And so covering them is a good idea. It's a good time to put out your onions and leeks. They are very hardy. I haven't seen any damage to onions with temperatures that were not below 24 degrees. If you're going to plant or transplant strawberries or raspberries, this is a good time. And if you're planting potatoes under straw, good time to do that later in the month. If you have started plants from seed, be sure that you allow enough time to harden them off. Let me tell you that I've learned this lesson the hard way. So take the time to harden your transplants off before you get ready to put them in the garden, and take our wind conditions into account, because that is one of the stresses on plants that are getting hardened off. These are some transplants from, as you can see, they're vigorous, they're healthy. They were grown with good potting soil, good light, and good temperature control. If you sowed spinach in the fall and other greens, you'll be getting a wonderful harvest by now. Keep cutting them back to within a couple inches so that they'll keep growing. If you've got stuff from your stored produce that away from you, get it in your compost pile. Again, storage varieties of onions can easily last into the summer. Just be sure you have them in good conditions to optimize their storage length. Okay, this is a time when you can get those early tomatoes out. These are walls of water in this picture. You can get them everywhere online in our garden nurseries, and they are a really handy tool. It's, excuse me, just for fun, but it does allow you to extend your season, pulling it forward, as much as a month ahead of what you might normally do. Don't be prepared that you might have to cover them, put additional cover on them if it gets really cold, which it has been known to do. Okay, whoops, that was the last April. Any questions, Tony?
Yes, we do have a couple.
Okay.
Again, from our new gardener, is it better to plant directly in the ground or use boxes or elevated beds? And how to protect your garden from animals?
Well, the first question is, if you mean boxes built up in a garden on the soil, I think that's a matter of preference. As you can see in this particular picture that's up there, I mound my beds to both define the bed so I don't walk on it, and also to elevate it a little bit to optimize the warming. You don't have to do that. The two advantages are the ones I've listed, but you can just plant right into the ground. And if you've got good soil, your plants will do just fine. They don't need to have any kind of special box around them, or they don't have to be elevated. As I said, the advantage of that is just they'll warm a little faster. If you have problematic drainage in your soil, mounding them up would also facilitate drainage. What was the other question?
How do we protect from animals?
Well, it depends on what kind of animals you're talking about. Large animals, you have to fence. Small animals, I suspect you'd have to live trap. At the Eastside Community Gardens, our kids' gardens have struggled with little ground squirrel type things. And the only way we were able to control those is to live trap them and remove them. They're right next to an open field. So I'm not sure which of those animals you have to deal with, but smaller critters like raccoons and skunks who can get in and bother your corn, we have used electric fence at the appropriate time in the year to deter those guys. It also deters people if they don't know it's there, so you got to be careful, but that would be what I recommend.
And then we just had a comment about not putting any weed seeds or rhizomatous plants in the compost. So
yes, I mentioned that earlier, but that's a good thing to emphasize. You don't want any rhizomatous plants like quackgrass in your compost, or any plants with weed seeds, any weeds that have seeds on them, unless you are really a very accomplished composter. If you're getting your compost up to 155, 160 degrees and holding it there, and you're sure that your whole pile has gotten to that temperature, then it kills both those things. But in the absence of that kind of control, you just don't put them in your compost.
okay, that was it.
Okay, we're going to May.
Do you want to make a comment about how long you're going to go on here?
Yeah, I was just thinking. So it's a little after 11 already, and we're on May, which leaves us a lot of months to go. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep going, and we'll go until noon. Those people who need to leave at 11:30, just keep in mind that we are recording this and it will be posted. But I'm just going to keep working my way through these months and answering questions at the end. And then if we have some time still at the end of the month, at the end of the presentation, we can answer further questions. But it's going to be hard to get all this in by 11:30. So I don't want to go too fast. If you think I'm going too fast, send Tony a note and he'll let me know. Okay. Now we're on to May. For some reason, I can't see the top of my screen. Update your garden plan. If you've done things differently than you originally planned, that's fine. Just make some notes so that next year when you go to make decisions, you'll know what your final plan had been for the previous year. We live in a high desert, and I think sometimes we forget that, but it's really important that we think about how we use the water in our gardens, not only because we want to conserve water, but also because we want to have healthy soil and plants. And the manner in which you apply your water and the amount of water and when you put it on is important. So I would suggest that you might want to get our Water-Wise Gardening class on the 13th of February on your calendar and learn some more about how to effectively use the water that you need to have a healthy garden without wasting any. Use your garden notebooks. I have found them invaluable because there's just no way you're going to remember everything that you learn in a season, both good and bad. You know, I did this wrong and this happened, or this was great, or this variety was delicious. 6 months from the time you last consider all that stuff, a lot of it is going to have disappeared from your brain. If you've written it down, you can go back and look at that, and it will really inform the decisions that you make for the remainder of the season and for subsequent seasons. So make a concerted effort. Get an old notebook and keep your notes in there and your garden maps and that kind of stuff. Keep ahead of the weeds. That Cobra head's going to come in handy all summer long. You can use other tools as well, stirrup or regular hose, winged weeders, There's a long handled cobra head now. All of those things will help you keep ahead of that, and continue to use lots of mulches, organic mulches like grasses and straws and stuff like that. Keep sheet mulching. Anywhere you see a problem, get the weeds out, sheet mulch it, and that will help you really get control of your weeds in the long term. Start supporting tomatoes as needed. There are two different kinds of tomatoes: determinate, which are self-contained, they grow to a certain height and then they stop, and indeterminate, which just keeps growing forever. And they're very vigorous and productive plants, but they do need to be supported. So you need to start paying attention as early as May to seeing if your tomatoes need support. This is a good time to start tender herbs. Give them a couple of weeks. The same thing with melons and cukes. I wouldn't go more than 2 to 3 weeks before planting them out, because they tend to get root bound, and then they are stressed when you plant them out, and that slows down their transition. But a couple weeks in a pot, they're just up, putting maybe out their first true leaf. That's a good time to get them in the ground. So you just have to time that depending on your best guess about what Idaho weather is going to do. If you want to give some warmth-loving annual flowers like zinnias and cosmos and marigold a head start, start some, 2 to 3 weeks before you want to put them out. And again, that will just give them a little bit of a head start. You'll get blooms a little sooner. Keep working on your compost. Pay attention to the soil moisture. One of the challenges of composting here is having enough moisture in your pile to keep the microbes happy and keep the process going. Whenever you're planting, add some compost or compost extract in with your plants as they go in. Good time to plant potatoes. Direct sow, in other words, put the seeds in the ground for beets, chard, kohlrabi, carrots. Later in the month, you can direct sow zucchini and other squash. You might have to cover it once they're up, but you might not. Continue planting your early cool-loving crops like radishes and greens. If you put some in every couple of weeks, maybe just do 3 feet, and then 2 weeks later do 3 more feet. You can get a more continuous harvest that way. If you're doing your corn, I've been as brazen as to plant on the 5th of May and had it successful. And I've also done that and had it get frosted. But sometime in May, you can start your corn. Just be sure that you have at least a 4x4 area of each variety. That ensures that it will, in our windy climate, get properly pollinated. Transplant tomatoes and peppers towards the end of the month. Typically that works. Be prepared to cover, because sometimes it doesn't. As somebody noted, the last 2 springs have been pretty iffy. You'll be getting rhubarb and strawberries will start coming on by the end of the month. You can continue to harvest your lettuce and greens. If you cut them to about 2 inches, they will regrow for quite a long time into the summer. That little strawberry is one of our sprout strawberries from some years ago. Just for fun, take some time to just enjoy your garden, to walk around and observe what's going on and take pleasure in this little micro environment that you've created. Tony, questions?
We do have a question and a comment here.
Okay.
Would you comment on the plastic mulching that we saw in some of those pictures? And the next question was, how do you make compost extract?
Okay. The plastic mulch is really useful for warming the soil, which is a big advantage for our warm weather crops like peppers and tomatoes. In the past, I used to use just the plastic mulch, build my soil through the rest of the year, and then put plastic mulch down for those really warm, loving plants. Last several years, I've been laying down a mulch around the plants and then putting the plastic mulch on top of that, so that I'm continuing to feed the soil underneath the mulch. And I've been happy with that. I'm going to continue to do that because I like the advantage of having the plastic mulch to increase the soil temperature. But I really appreciate the fact that now at the same time, I just don't have that plastic on bare soil. I've got it on top of that organic material. And that's been a good thing for my soil. And what was the other question?
Before we leave that, there's been red plastic and green plastic. Is there a reason to use a special color?
Well, the science behind that says that red plastic has reflects a certain part of the light spectrum that is really advantageous for warm weather plants. I have seen some advantage to it. It's kind of an obnoxious color to have in your garden. So I have some of the kind of army green mulch. I use both of those. And I don't use black simply because it isn't something that I have on hand. I do think green, both the IRT, it's called IRT plastic, and it's engineered to reflect a certain part of the spectrum, both the green and the red. And both of them are supposed to give you better results than just a plain black plastic.
Okay,
they're widely available.
How do you make compost extract?
You mix a pound of compost into a 5-gallon bucket of water. You gently stir it around for a minute or two, maybe, yeah. And then you pour it off. You can just use the liquid. If you're using a watering can, you just filter out the heavier particles of the compost and put that back in your compost. Or if you're just using the bucket, you can just pour it straight out of the bucket. It's just a little faster method of extracting more of the biology out of the compost.
Okay, and somebody wanted to know, if you had black plastic, would you use it as a mulch?
That's a good question. Probably not, but I don't have any really good reason for that, other than the IRT plastics do a better job of reflecting the spectrum that you want on your plants. But I don't think it would hurt anything. It's probably just not quite as good as those specialty plastics.
Okay, that's it.
And it's quite possible to grow those things without any plastic mulch at all. The one thing I would caution is that if you do want to use just an organic mulch on those warm weather loving plants, that you hold off putting that mulch on until the soil has thoroughly warmed up, because the organic mulches do cool the soil. And tomatoes and melons and peppers, they like warm soil. So let them get their feet warm first before you put any significant amount of organic mulch on the ground, if you don't want to use the plastic mulch. Okay, that was it. Okay. All right, we're into June. And start thinking about fall harvest. There are some things that you're going to want to plant in the summer if you want to be able to harvest them into the fall. We don't have a long fall season typically. Some years it has gone as late as the end of October before we started getting hard frosts. Other years it's the middle of September. But you can get some nice harvests of things if you start them in July and August. Johnny's has a good calculator for fall planting as well. So go back to Johnny's Seeds and check that out if you want to do some fall planting. You're still working on those weeds. Don't give up. The longer you can keep the weeds contained and controlled and removed, the better it's going to be. And every successive year, it will get that much better. If the cool weather crops are up and growing strong, like peas and your brassicas, go ahead and start mulching around them. Watch your climbing plants and stake them or trellis them as needed to keep them off the ground. Start paying attention, watching for insects. This is a time when we'll start to see our first insects, and containing them when you see them early is much easier than trying to get ahead of them if you've waited too long. So start paying close attention to that. Deadhead your annual flowers, cut off the dead blooms, and that will encourage them to keep blooming for as long as you keep deadheading them usually. Keep watching your tomatoes for support and pay attention to such things as cabbage butterflies that almost certainly will be around by June. And again, there are multiple things you can do. My preference is BT. Other people prefer row cover, but you have to do something, otherwise you'll end up eating little worms, which isn't that fun. Everything can now go directly into the soil. Towards the end of the month, you can start some more seedlings inside to move out to the coolest part of the garden. That'll extend your lettuce harvest. It will still be truncated because once it gets really hot, the lettuce won't be happy, but you can push it a little bit by doing that. You can also direct sow out in the garden to extend your lettuce harvest. Some fall plants might need to be planted this month. Just use that fall harvest calculator to see which those might be. Most of them will be later in the summer, but there might be a few. Keep your compost turned. If you're doing an active pile, pay attention to the moisture level. You need to do that throughout our summer because it's so dry. If you are going to do some seed saving, now's the time to start paying attention to the plants that exhibit characteristics that you really like. Vigor, taste. You won't know taste for tomatoes for a while, but other plants like lettuces and things, you can tell. Fragrance, and mark them with some method of marking. Colored yarn is helpful. Tags will work. Just so that you know once the seed season starts, which were the plants that you really wanted to save seeds from. Oops, forgot this last one. You can learn more about seed saving with Casey O'Leary. She's going to teach a seed saving class on March 6th. As I said before, she's very enthusiastic, very knowledgeable, and very inspiring. So get that on your calendar if you're interested in seed saving. This is a good time to divide and replant Dutch iris if they've finished blooming. You can sow some more corn early in the month. You can direct sow these flowers and plantings of things like radishes and lettuce. Once it gets really hot, they won't germinate well and they won't grow well once they're up. But up until the point when it starts to get really hot, you can continue to keep planting. Thinning your carrots and beets is really critical if you want to have nicely sized tubers or roots when you're done. As you thin them, particularly with beets, you can just wash those and steam the whole thing, and they're quite delicious. Start paying attention to your peas. The pods are going to start filling out, and you just can test them by picking one and seeing if the peas have gotten big enough. You can also, as you see in this picture, if you get the right angle of the sun, you can tell how filled out they are. You're looking for the pod to be fully filled out, but not packed in and they'll get kind of bitter if they get too big. Keep picking your produce when it's in its prime. That will keep your plants producing, and it'll extend your harvest. And if you have more than you can need, there are lots of people and places that you can share that with. Some fun things to sow here are any of the dried bean varieties. Soybeans, lima beans, black-eyed peas. Those are all things that you want to wait till the soil's warm to plant them, but they will come. They're fairly short season except for the lima beans, and you almost always get a nice harvest from those. And another fun thing to do is just get some kids together and build a scarecrow. That's a lot of fun. Okay, do we have any questions, Tony?
We have one question. Can you recommend how to control flea beetles?
I would suggest that that we wait and address that question in our organic control of pests and diseases. One of our board members, Sue Holt, will be teaching that, and that would be a good place to get an answer. And now Sue will have a heads up that that's one of the things she should be sure to address.
Okay, that was it.
Okay. July, keep weeding. You're going to get tired of seeing this, but this is the month when it's most challenging. You've been doing it for several months. You're getting really tired of it. But it's probably the most critical time, because this is when the weeds are really going to take off. And so your persistence at this point will have very profound effects for your garden later in the season, but especially in the next seasons. As the weather heats up, get a nice organic mulch under your plants. I've never seen a cauliflower head quite like that. That's not one of my pictures, but the mulch around it is a good illustration of what you can do to keep that soil cooler for those cool weather crops. You can also get them around your warm weather crops like tomatoes and peppers and that kind of thing. Continue to start lettuce seedlings inside to plant out in the garden. It's going to get marginal about how successful that will be by the end of the month. Then you'll want to be planting directly in the ground again for a fall harvest. Chinese cabbage is a wonderful plant to experiment with. I've had both tragic failures and really marvelous successes. But planting it in the late summer is optimal for a lot of varieties. You need to just pay attention to that when you choose your varieties, whether it's when it's best for putting out. If you've planted garlic, and you will have harvested it by the end of the month, most likely, put a succession crop into that soil. Keep some roots in your soil as much of the season as you can. So put in a succession crop of beans or plant a cover crop of something like buckwheat. Monitor your soil moisture in your compost and start a new compost. If you've got one that's nearly finished, get another one started. You're going to have a lot of material for it as the season winds down. And so that will be your compost for the next year. So get another one started. Direct sow Chinese cabbage, that's Napa cabbage for fall harvest. Again, succession crop of cover crop or buckwheat or some kind of summer mix. And we have a couple of documents online about cover crops, what kind of mixes you can get, where to get them, that kind of stuff. Review your fall planting schedule to see if there are any other seeds that you should be planting now. Start watching your beans for harvestable size. Early cabbage could be getting ready now. If you see any signs of cracking, it's time to harvest it. You can harvest cabbage at any point once it's big enough to be usable. But if it starts to crack, then you need to get it out. If you've planted your potatoes under straw, once it's finished blossoming, you can start pulling that straw back gently and finding tubers that are ready to eat in there. Just be sure that you carefully replace the straw so that you don't end up with a bunch of green potatoes. Harvest fruit at its peak. So apricots, you could be getting raspberries, cherries. Summer apples will be later in the season typically, but sometimes they're ready by the end of the month. Your garlic is ready to harvest when it has 4 or 5 green leaves remaining. So pull it up, hang it in a shaded, dry location for at least 4 weeks. And for fun, use some of that great fruit harvest to make apricot or other fruit leathers, or let it dry. You can dry the leather in the sun under screens, or you can just dry apricot or plum halves out in the sun as well. And again, if you have little people in your life, making a mosaic stepping stone is really a fun thing to do. Okay, questions, Tony?
I have one question. Should we mulch around root crops like carrots and beets?
You can. They generally produce enough of a canopy of greens that they don't really need to be mulched. And it's difficult to mulch except on the outside of even a wide row, because you can't mulch. If you've got broad rows, you can't mulch in between all the plants. I don't mulch my beets or carrots, either one.
Okay, we have another question. Can you tell when beans are ready to harvest, green and dried varieties?
Well, green varieties are harvestable once they're big enough to eat. There's an optimal size for them, which you can find out by reading your variety information. Sometimes it's 4 inches and sometimes it's 8 inches. But as soon as they're big enough to eat, they're edible. Dried beans, you wait until the plant begins to turn brown. And if that hasn't happened by the end of the season, you harvest them, because hard frost will damage a seed that isn't properly dry. So you harvest them and bring the whole plant or the pods in and let them dry in a garage or a shed or something like that.
Okay, that was it for our questions.
All right. How's our time? Oh,
It's
we're blazing.
11:35.
Okay. So let's see. We'll just move on here. August. Maintenance. Yes, you still have to be weeding. You can start to ease off on the watering schedule. Particularly avoid sprinkling late in the day or in the evening. This is a time when some of our most serious tomato diseases can appear. A lot of times we're getting showers in August. This past year we didn't. But if you are sprinkling your garden, which I don't recommend, but sometimes you don't have a choice, don't do it in the evening where that moisture is going to sit on the plant and create a really humid, moist microenvironment, which is the perfect host for particularly some harmful fungi like the one I can't think of at the moment. So anyway, don't do evening sprinkling. And if you can avoid overhead watering altogether, that's best. Keep touring the garden, watching out for insects, observing all the critters that are are part of that web of life that you've got going out there. As crops are harvested, plant a succession crop of beans. If there's time, which is usually 5 to 6 weeks. If not, put a fall cover crop mix in. You can let that grow up, and then it just can get winter killed, and you'll have all that nice residue on the garden through the winter, and most of it will be decomposed by the time you're ready to plant next year. Keep adding to your compost pile and monitoring the moisture. We do start to get more afternoon showers in August typically, so it's not quite as critical if that's happening, but if it's not, pay attention to that. This is a good time to direct sow spinach and cilantro and those kinds of things for a fall crop. They're pretty tough. They can go into, keep growing well into the fall, even after we start getting some light frosts. As crops are harvested again, this is both soil building and planting. As they're harvested, get your cover crop in those empty beds. The more time of the year that you have roots in the soil, the better it is for those microorganisms that are doing all the work in your soil. So getting those cover crops in is really a valuable part of the season. If you're planning to save seeds, now's the time to start monitoring those plants that you selected earlier in the summer by marking them. The easiest ones are the greens, like lettuce and arugula, spinach, auric, beans, hollyhocks. They'll do it for you, so will lettuce. Even tomatoes. None of those are hard to do. You can get really good instructions for that, both on our website and also at Seed Savers Exchange, which is an organization devoted to preserving seed diversity. Harvest your onions when the tops tip over. Dry for a couple of weeks in a dry shaded location. Don't leave them out in the full sun. Continue to monitor and harvest all of your crops for extended production. Some things, once you've harvested them, like corn, they're not going to make another ear, but other things like your beans, if you keep those harvested, they will keep trying to produce until frost. Just for fun, enter something in the Eastern Idaho State Fair. And these are good links. I've updated them. So if you think you'd like to grow a pumpkin or take your giant tomato down, this is a link for how to get into the network of state fair activities. Any questions, Tony?
We do have one question. How do you tell when corn is ripe?
Well, that's a good question. What you're going to watch for is you wait for the silk to brown. When the silk first appears, it's very silken and live. And it's actually the vehicle that transports the pollen down to each kernel of corn. Every kernel of corn is attached to one of those silks. When those have turned dry and are brown, that means that all the pollination is done, the seed has developed. Then what you'll have to do from that point on is feel the ear. And if it feels like it's filling out, you can gently pull down just a little bit of the husk on the top and look at the kernels, poke them with your thumbnail. If they're juicy and filled out, it's ready to eat. And you'll learn how to do that. The more you grow it, the better you'll get at identifying without even opening the tops of it. That's it?
That was the end of the questions.
Okay, so
got muted, unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me again? Sorry, I don't know how that happened. You'll be tempted to stop weeding, but don't. It's getting easier and easier, and every week that you stay with it makes the future brighter. As plants quit producing, move them into the compost pile. You're putting a lot of greens in at this point, so try to balance that with browns. That'll keep your compost in a good balance. Be prepared to cover frost-sensitive plants when the temperatures drop, which they will do at some point during this month. That's your tomatoes, peppers, melons, all of those things that you started early or put it in the ground really late, beans. Those are all things that are going to be sensitive to frost. Direct sow spinach. Now, this is a fun thing that I discovered kind of by accident. I now actively plant spinach in the middle of September. It will come up and be growing before the hard cold comes, but it will winter over. And when spring temperatures come up enough, it'll start growing again. And you can get a really lovely extended harvest of spinach that you often don't get here by planting in the spring because our temperatures and the light are not conducive to a long harvest. As crops are harvested, again, get that cover crop in your empty beds. Even if it's quite late in the season and it just grows a little bit, it will be doing some advantage, giving some advantage to your soil. Your garlic, which was hanging, you can now trim the roots off, cut the greens that have turned brown, cut the tops off, pack them into mesh bags to keep good air circulation and a cool, dry location. The same thing with onions. If it's been a good season, you'll be overrun with tomatoes. Lots of things you can do with those. If you're going to be seed saving, now's the time to select specimens of your best tomatoes from as many different plants of that same variety as possible and save the seeds. Fall greens, you can start cutting sometime this month and you'll cut them right up until it's a good hard frost. If you're planning on making fermented hot sauce, keep an eye on your peppers. Keep covering them so you get as many red ripe peppers as you can. And if you're really interested in fermentation, get our March 15th fermentation class on your calendar. That'll be a fun one. Clean up your garden weeds. Oops, sorry, we were at the end of September. I guess there was nothing fun to do in September. Do we have any questions, Tony?
Please comment. Oh, well, I'm going to start at the top here. If I didn't get spinach planted last fall, would I be able to put seeds out now for an early spring harvest?
The soil temperature is going to be too cold and they won't germinate until the soil temperature comes up. The point of doing it in the fall is you catch the end of the season and you get the seeds germinated. And then the plant is sturdy enough that it can winter over. You could put seeds in the soil now, but they likely wouldn't germinate for another couple of months. And they might, if the soil warms up enough, they could rot before they germinate. So I think if it might be interesting to try doing it in February, putting some seeds in the soil in mid to late February and seeing if you can get an earlier germination that way. But the disadvantage now is your soil temp, which is in the fall, that's not an issue.
Okay, next question. Please comment on garlic seed for planting.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're wanting to know, but the garlic seed that you use to plant your fall garlic, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is it's the cloves from the bulbs that you grew this current season. So those garlics that you harvested and dried will be the bulbs that you break apart, and you plant those cloves in October for your next year's crop.
Okay, that's all we had.
Okay, then we'll go on to October. Clean up garden weeds and other detritus, compost as much as you can. But again, be sure to avoid rhizomatous or seedy weeds. If you've got any diseases in your garden, don't compost those plants. Keep paying attention to weeds that might be in your cover crop. They're pretty good at hiding themselves. You'll want to remove them because they're almost certainly going to get seeds on them. The cover crop can stay in place. Starting to do some cleanup now, put away your trellises, etc. A hard lesson that we've learned over the years is when we pull up our drip systems now, we roll them up and tag them with where they came from. It's much easier than having a mass of unknowns in the spring. This is when you would plant those garlic cloves that you dried the bulbs of in the summer. You can just keep a continuous lineage going. You grow them in the summer, dry them, use some for eating, and take others and use them for the seeds for your next year's crop. Keep cover cropping. If you don't have cover crop seeds, be sure your soil is covered with something as winter approaches. Leaves, grass clippings, straw, preferably chopped up, but it doesn't have to be, etc. You can extend the fall harvest of your fall crops by using a double layer of row cover to give a little extra cold protection. That'll buy you sometimes another couple weeks of harvest of lettuce and things like that. You want to harvest your winter squash, pumpkins, cabbages, etc. before a hard frost, because you don't want damage on those. That will really shorten the storage life. Your cabbage, Brussels sprouts, up above, I don't mean cabbage in this top one, I mean cauliflower. I need to get that fixed. Cabbage and Brussels sprouts and kale, they can hold all the way down to 24-ish degrees. To maximize your storage, come back here. You want to have a cool, and if you can control the humidity and keep it humid, even better, but as cool a location as possible. The exception to that is tomatoes. You want to store those 50 degrees or warmer, because there's a chemical change that goes on in a tomato below 50 degrees, which kind of impairs the flavor. Don't store them in a bucket where they're all piled up on top of each other. This is how I store my green tomatoes in the fall, in a place where I have some temperature control to let them ripen for later use. If there's snow on the ground, oh wait, we're in November. Any questions, Tony? Okay, all right. You can stop weeding now as long as there's snow on the ground. And by November, invariably there are. If you want to try to harvest over, or winter over things like carrots, parsnips, leeks, you're going to cover them with 10 to 12 inches of loose straw, preferably before they get snow on them. Bring in the last of the hardy brassicas. And just for fun, this is the time when you would put some bulbs into pots and store them in a cold location. That can either be an old refrigerator, you can dig holes out in the garden and put them in the soil and then put a board over the top with some mulch on it and leave them there for 12 weeks. These are the ones you will pull out in February and then have this joyous bloom of daffodils or tulips or whatever you've put in there. December is just for fun. So think about the garden books or tools or supplies that you'd like to have for your next season and get those on your Christmas list. And generally by Christmas time, you're already getting early bird catalogs. So you can sit back and enjoy looking through those and anticipating what you're going to do with your next year's garden. And
We do have a question.
good. We've made it to the end. So now we can just open this up to questions for as long as people want to ask them.
Okay, this question is, does light exposure for tomato storage matter?
You don't want to put tomatoes in a sunny location. People often will do that. If you're going to use them right away, it probably doesn't matter. But if you have a significant amount of tomatoes, green tomatoes that you're bringing in and you're trying to ripen them, don't put them in a sunny place. And I really don't think that the light is particularly significant. The process, the chemical process has already started in them and it will unfold. Probably not in the dark as well, but it doesn't necessarily have to be bright light.
That's the only question we have right now.
Okay, let's just open this up for a Q&A if there are any unanswered questions in general, or questions that you have about, for instance, our garden registration for a community garden or any of that. Toss them off to Tony. In fact, maybe what we can do now is I will stop this share. And if you'd like to turn your video back on and be a face on the screen instead of not being here at all, you're welcome to do that. Also, if you have other questions, send them in to Tony.
How do you send questions into Tony?
Well, we're hearing you. So if you have a question, go ahead and ask it. You do it via the chat at the bottom of your screen.
Okay. When you use wall of water, do you uncover the wall of water during the day? If like you put cardboard over it?
Yeah, if you don't often need to do that. Walls of water can protect a plant down to, I think, about 27 degrees. But if it's going to get colder than that and you put a cardboard box over it, you want to take it off in the day.
So we
generally those kind of cold stretches are, you know, 1 night or 2 nights, not an extended period of time.
We had a question, if garlic has dried, will it still sprout?
Yes, actually garlic needs to dry prior to, I mean, it will still sprout. If you were to take a bulb of garlic out of the ground that had finished growing but wasn't dry, you could replant it. But the drying process doesn't impede its ability to germinate. So the garlics that you've hung up and dried for 4 or 6 weeks are quite suitable for breaking apart and replanting. Once they're in a dark, cool place, they start to put out roots. And they will do that even though they've been dry for 6 or 8 months.
How about if it was as dry as you would use for garlic powder?
No, because then it's totally desiccated. For garlic powder, you dry them out so that they're hard and moisture free. In that case, if there was a sprout in there, it would be dead. So the drying that you do as part of your harvesting process leaves plenty of moisture in the bulb. Just as you know, when you open a garlic clove to use for cooking, it's got plenty of moisture in it. So not garlic powder dry, but yes, harvesting dry.
Are territorial seeds good for Idaho Falls area?
Yeah, Earth Oil has good seeds, and they do a lot of testing and trial gardening, and so they will have maybe less selection for the really long season things, long season tomatoes, long season corn. I don't know how extensive their collection is in those long season things because they're geared for Oregon short seasons, not very sunny seasons.
And how close to the garden can you put your compost pile?
It doesn't matter. It could be in your garden if you wanted it to be.
Christy, this past summer or fall, I have not picked all my garlic plants out of a little area in my garden. I want to establish a garlic plot, basically. And is that as acceptable, as doable, will work as well as if I just planted new bulbs every fall?
Leaving them in from season to season.
Yeah, I just don't pick all the plants. I don't pick all the bulbs out.
The problem with that is that in a bulb of garlic, there might be as many as 8 or 10 cloves. Each of those cloves will sprout into its own plant. And so you have really crowded conditions if you leave a whole bulb there.
Yeah, so what I've been doing is trying to pick out some bulbs out of individual plants so that it's not so crowded. And then I'd leave some of the other bulbs just in the soil. Does that make sense?
Cloves or bulbs?
Well, I'll pick out.
You're just thinning it essentially by
Yeah,
pulling some of
thinning it.
those. I
Yeah,
think
thinning it.
the issue would be the crowding. So as long as you're taking care of that, then
Okay,
you'd be fine.
okay.
Folks, as we go on, feel free to say goodbye if you need to, but you're welcome to stay until we close the meeting. Any other questions? Okay, I don't hear any or see any.
Okay.
We have one
Where will this recording be posted?
sometime this week,
We hope.
we hope. So this is a lot of information. Don't feel overwhelmed by it. The PowerPoint presentation will be updated and posted on the website this weekend. And once we figure out how to post the link for this recording, we'll do that. Thank you to all of you who have joined us. We really appreciate you coming and participating in our inaugural effort to do a virtual class. Please let us know, and there's an address on the website, growifcga@gmail.com, or via messages here before we close the meeting. If you have any suggestions for what we could do to